no high UNC official met any PDP official.
You don't need the UNC to pass the bill.
This is the worst and they need to go.
Fire burn you, Guardian.
How much more could we tolerate?
You lack the intellect and the competence.
Everywhere else is vaccinating except Trinidad and Tobago.
You cannot pay people money that you owe them.
A pleasant good evening to all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and a special welcome to the constituents of Fyzabad and to listeners of the wider nation. I want to say a very special greetings to the Muslim community on the occasion of the month of Ramadan, and to wish my Muslim brothers and sisters all the best as they do their fasting in this very holy time. I also want to pay tribute and to give condolences to the family of parliamentary colleague, former Senator Franklin Khan, who has roots in Fyzabad and who spent a considerable period of his life in Fyzabad. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for joining us here tonight. And I say a very special welcome on behalf of the constituency of Fyzabad. I am Dr. Lakram Bodo, Member of Parliament for Fyzabad and Deputy Political Leader of the United National Congress. So we are here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, because our country is facing a tremendous challenge. And this is one of several meetings that the party has held, trying to bring information and knowledge to the population and in terms of why we think the Procurement Act should be repealed. Ladies and gentlemen, a country's procurement system is essential to service delivery, technological advancement, free trade agreements, procurement of medical and other equipment. The demands of modern society have made procurement more complex and strategic. Procurement is about acquiring goods and services, not just at the right price, but also in the right quantity and quality, and in a timely manner, and most important, to ensure that the public gets value for money. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it is taxpayers' dollars that are spent when a government procures goods and services. However, we must understand that while procurement and disposal of public property at the macro level may be governed by a political agenda, at the procedural level, it is governed by proper public policy, and the rule of law must always prevail to ensure our citizens are protected. Most countries around the world counter corruption through effective and efficient procurement laws by which it allows taxpayers to hold their government accountable for their actions. However, ladies and gentlemen, in Trinidad and Tobago, we are seeing a government that is attempting to manipulate the law for their own benefit and to undermine the very citizens that elected them. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I have with me the honor and pleasure of a panel of varied experts who will join me to give their own perspective in terms of the procurement law and why it should be repealed. On my immediate right, I have Mr. Sean Sobers, former senator, attorney at law, and previous candidate for San Fernando West. Next to him is Mr. Ghassan Yusuf, a businessman who is hailing all the way from Port of Spain. I say a special welcome and thank him, and also former mayor of Arima. Next to Mr. Yusuf is Ramona Victor, hard-working young councillor of the Sipara Regional Corporation, to bring our own perspective from the local government point. And last but not least, to her right is Mr. Ved Siriram, who is a financial advisor, former senior banker with Citibank, former senior manager Citibank, and also a businessman in his own right. So, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, what I would want to do is to ask Sean Sobers to give us a bit of legal perspective on what is wrong with this procurement legislation. Sean, can I invite you?
A special good night to the constituents of Fyzabad, and a special good night to MP Bodo for inviting me here this evening, and to all our distinguished members of the panel who took the time to be here this evening as well. We are here as a continuing effort as mandated by the leader of the United National Congress to spread this message about the issues that are currently plaguing this procurement bill that is before the Parliament currently. I mean, it has been passed, but it has not been enacted. And to put this squarely into perspective and into context, we have to understand the history of this particular piece of legislation finding its way to the Parliament, number one, and two, what I can only describe as a mutation of the good works and efforts of the People's Partnership Administration of this particular piece of legislation that has been properly well corrupted by the People's National Movement. Now, the last time that we had a discussion on this particular bill, I would have made mention to the public that this bill or procurement legislation on the whole has had its genesis in certain statements and allegations that were made by the current Prime Minister, Member of Parliament, as he then was, against his Prime Minister, Mr. Patrick Manning. When 2007 or 2008, Dr. Keith Rowley stood up in the Parliament and accused his Prime Minister of being involved or negligently or allowing bid rigging to take place at the UDCOT under the hand or under the stewardship of Calder Hart. And he gave several examples as to why he came to that conclusion that something notorious, something nefarious was taking place within UDCOT. And it is based upon those accusations that Dr. Rowley, as he then was, leveled against his Prime Minister, that there was a commission of inquiry, an off-commission of inquiry that was set up to investigate those allegations. And there was a report that was generated, and the findings, 91 recommendations that came out of those findings, that confirmed that there were several issues plaguing UDCOT and that there was need for reformation. And that need for reformation came in the form of proper procurement legislation that was put together and moved by the People's Partnership under the astute leadership of Mrs. Kamla Persad Bissessa. We don't talk about that enough. And that's why we say as a party, as a responsible party, when we call the People's National Movement and its members hypocritical, its leadership, its hierarchy hypocritical, we mean that in the truest possible way. Because it is this same man who leveled allegations and accusations against his Prime Minister then, who spurred this transformation and this invention, this genesis of the procurement legislation, is now turning around as the Prime Minister of this country and properly well gutted an act of Parliament that was passed by the People's Partnership in 2014 to what it is today. And that is why we are sitting down here as a responsible opposition to inform you, the public, that this cannot stand. That procurement legislation is important. It is important when your resources, your money, your tax-paying dollars are being spent. People need to do so in a transparent and accountable manner. And the amendments that have been brought towards this legislation, this particular bill that moves these amendments, seek to change that position and allow the PNM administration to basically do what they want with your patrimony, with your money, with your tax-paying dollars. And they seek to do that in three particular ways as set out in these amendments. So that in Clause 5 of the bill seeks to amend Section 7.5 of the Act which would remove from the Office of the Procurement Regulator his ability to have oversight over the procurement of particular services, such as legal services, financial services, accounting and auditing services, medical services, which I'm sure Dr. Bodo will expand on, and any other services as the Minister by order may deem fit and necessary. So any Monday morning, the Minister can pass an order to say that he thinks that X particular service, which does not fall under this amendment, should fall within that amendment now, and the Office of the Procurement Regulator should have no oversight. Clause 5 of the Act also seeks to amend Section 7.2, which removes from the Office of the Procurement Regulator the ability to have oversight over government-to-government arrangements and government-to-international financial institution arrangements. And we have several examples where such arrangements, if not for the keen eye of the United National Congress and its leader, would have had perilous and detrimental effects on the people of Trinidad and Tobago and its economy. And the two particular instances that are brought to mind are this hostile situation with respect to the procurement of those vessels and the China-Gazuwa contract, which we spent a considerable amount of time prosecuting the People's National Movement on. Because that particular contract sought to benefit the contractors, this private contracting firm, against the people of Trinidad and Tobago, favoring them against the hard-working citizens of this country. And the last clause that I would make mention of now is clause 6, which seeks to amend section 13.1.0, totally deleting that particular section, which removes from the Office of the Procurement Regulator the ability to have oversight of the disposal of state property. Now that is something profound in nature and something that we will pay particular attention to and will be discussed extensively. State assets are not only physical buildings and property. State assets refers to land as well too, that is owned by the state. And they are going to be placed in a position where they can dispose of these things, and you and I and all the hardworking tax-paying members of this country will not have a say in how that is done. That is the definition of selling patrimony, your patrimony, our patrimony. And that is why we thought it necessary, our leader thought it necessary to properly get out there in front of the public and prosecute this thing. Information gives you power. And with sufficient information out there, we hope that it can spur the public into a particular position and affect certain emotions to change the way in which the PNM is doing business with respect to its procurement regulation. Dr. Bodo?
Thank you very much, Sean. I'm sure citizens will be extremely concerned and worried about that particular clause 5, section 7, where such other services as the minister may by order determine. At this point, I just want to move on and invite my friend Gus to give his perspective, as a business person in the community, and what he thinks of this current law. Gus?
Thank you very much. Good evening, Trinidad and Tobago. Special good evening to the constituents of Fyzabad. And thank you very much, Dr. Lakram, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to expose on my opinion, to say what I have in mind concerning this particular procurement legislation and what the PNM government did with it. To me, corruption is one of the worst sickness can hit a society. Corruption eats away at the health of any society, and especially at the poor of the society. Now, this procurement legislation is designed to have somebody, what you call a regulator, that's what they call him, but is a watchman. I call it a camera, over the transactions that is being carried out by the state. You must remember, the state is the biggest trader, biggest buyer and seller in the country, bigger than any other company we have in the country. They buy and sell. So imagine somebody from the government or any company goes to buy a particular item, let us say for $100,000. He goes to the businessman and says, listen, make the invoice for 120, take 110 and give me 10,000. The businessman has nothing to lose. As a fact, he has to gain. And rather than losing the sale and this person to go elsewhere, he will go for it, most likely. But where this $20,000 coming from? It's coming from you and me. It's coming from you and me, from our pockets, from the natural resources of the country. That's where it's coming from. Imagine this is being done at the scale of 400 million, 200 million, at the scale of the country, the government. So this procurement legislation with the regulator is designed to be a watchman, a camera over these transactions. If you go to any business, any store, you will see a camera over the cashier. You go to any bank, they have cameras specially set over every teller to see when money passes, somebody is watching. You are being recorded. What these amendments did is that we invested the money to put the camera and the watchman, you know. We put in the money, we had setting up the office. But for certain transactions, we are taking off the camera. We're telling the watchman to move. So we could do our business. We could do what we want. How that could be fair? And you know, imagine, especially the financial institutions have so much cameras over their tellers, yet for financial dealings, this government say, no, you have to take off the camera. You have to put the watchman to sleep so we could do our business. How that could be? We cannot stand for that. It's better they take off the whole thing and forget it. Dr. Lacran talked about the medical equipment. You know, sometimes a breakdown will take in a machine somewhere in San Fernando General Hospital. They have to procure one, must be overnight the next day, where price doesn't matter. That is where corruption goes. Any price could go. They pay any kind of money and pocket any amount of money under the disguise. It's emergency. We need a watchman, we need a camera to be watching to see what's going on. And all over the world, corruption index is linked to poverty because corruption affects poor people much more than other sectors of society, because the other sectors of the society know how to get by. But the poor people, they have so limited of resources that this corruption affects them more than anybody else. Affect their children going to school, affect them putting a plate on the table for their children. So we need to demand that either we have a proper procurement legislation with a regulator overseeing everything or none. They need to repeal the amendments they have instituted. Thank you very much. That's all I'll say for now.
Gus, thank you very much. I think that's a very, very interesting perspective, you know, for the population to understand the issue of the camera for oversight, and now we're talking about the camera being removed. Very, very excellent example. Before I move on to the next member of the panel, and Sean, you did mention a bit of the history of the procurement legislation, and I just want to look back at the historical perspective, just for the, you know, to remind the population. And you see, the population must recall that it was the People's Partnership who brought and successfully passed procurement legislation in our parliament. In fact, in our 2010 manifesto, term prosperity for all, and you spoke about prosperity, Gus, which is important. The People's Partnership promised the introduction of procurement legislation which is fair, efficient, and transparent. So that was a manifesto promise in 2010. And in fact, on December 5th, 2014, the PP passed the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Bill 2014, while the PNM abstained. So since 2014, they have not been committed to proper public procurement. In fact, when we left office, all that was needed was for the government to create the regulations and outfit the Office of the Procurement Regulator. So they came back to Parliament to debate the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Bill 2016, which was passed by the Senate and the House on February 7th and March 2017. Then throughout 2017 and 2018, it was delay after delay as the Minister of Finance used a variety of excuses, such as the need to review the regulations, the need to liaise with the Office of the Procurement Regulator, etc. So there was a lot of to-in and fro-in, a lot of dragging of feet. And in fact, the Trinidad Newsday on Tuesday, 14 January 2020, reported procurement rules languishing on Imbert's desk. And the statement there is that the Finance Minister, Colm Imbert, received the regulations, the Public Procurement Act, 134 days before, but has not yet submitted them for Cabinet approval. So this historical perspective shows you that this government was never really committed to true procurement legislation. As I move on, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to get a local government perspective. Now, Ramona, you are faced at the local government level of limited and scarce resources. And of course, the resources that would be allocated to any regional corporation would come from the national budget. And of course, you would be very keen to ensure that you get adequate resources to service your burgesses. And therefore, you must have a perspective on this, not only as a councillor, but as an ordinary person as well, you know, trying to make a living, you know, at the level. So I just wanted to invite Ramona Victor, who is a councillor with the SIPA Regional Corporation, to give her perspective on this whole issue of the procurement legislation. Ramona.
Good evening to members of the panel, all persons listening and viewing the discussion. I want to start by saying a group of words placed together is not a sentence unless it makes complete sense. Likewise, the Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act is not effective and efficient unless it is repealed to its original form. The original form allows for transparency and oversight in the fight against corruption. For the past years, there has been no attempt by the PNM government to make any moves to operationalize the legislation. After repeated calls by the opposition and civil society, this government has failed to fully proclaim the legislation. I want to draw your attention to the assets of the Superior Regional Corporation. Presently, 65% of our vehicles are functional. The other 35% is in dire need of repairs. The procedure we must take for the other 35% is that the ministerial board must agree that the vehicles is too costly to maintain, then write the CEO informing him of same. Then the CEO will then write to the council informing of the vehicles that are non-functional, stating the defects with the vehicle. A signed letter by the CEO will be forwarded to the permanent secretary. The permanent secretary thereafter writes to the central tender boards. The central tender board writes to the department in charge of disposal in the Ministry of Finance. A date will be set to get the committee to view the vehicles to determine if the vehicles can be sold or disposed, followed by a date for auction of the vehicles. Then, whatever money is earned from the sale of the vehicles goes back to the Ministry of Finance. However, if there are proper legislation, the 35% of non-operational vehicles can be auctioned and money generated can be utilized for repairs of other vehicles and also to purchase new vehicles to ensure happiness of the purchases we represent at the Superior Regional Corporation. The objectives of the bill proposed by the civil society private sector group was to systematically bring all agencies spending public money under a single overarch, which will provide for effective mechanisms for oversight and control, enabling parties within that framework to be responsible for their transactions. Citizens are calling for the repeal of the amendment to ensure accountability, equity, confidence of the citizens, and development of the country. When we mention accountability, it refers to people being able to take responsibility for their actions, knowing that there will be consequences. Thereby, accountability would avoid circumstances like what we have in Trinidad and Tobago, where the same person who makes the law breaks the law. Another factor that strengthens the legislation is equity. There must be equity in the distribution of contracts. So Superior Regional Corporation must get releases for development projects based on the amount of residents and not based on how much P&M councillors there are in council. Additionally, public confidence supports good legislation. When we refer to public confidence, we mean that citizens of Trinidad and Tobago must feel a level of trust in the action of the government. But when a Prime Minister repeatedly tells us he is not closing down Petrotrin, and months after he closes all of Petrotrin, citizens are afraid to trust the decision made by the PNM government. Finally, the development of the country is a key criteria for proper legislation. There are numerous new, vibrant, competent, and honest contractors within Trinidad and Tobago. However, because we have a government that do not care about the welfare of its citizens, no new contractors are afforded the opportunity to serve within the corporations since 2016. Hence, the same group of contractors are given consistent work for 5 years and counting. So what are the new contractors left to do without any opportunities? For instance, if a contractor is employed within the municipality of the Superior Regional Corporation, he in turn employs persons living within that region. In return, money will be spent within the community, supporting local businesses, generating money for the bank, groceries, and small business owners. Thereby, we at the Superior Region has recently lost 2 major banks because of the lack of opportunities for a profitable financial institution. In conclusion, the need to repeal the amended procurement and disposal of public property is necessary to systematically bring all agencies spending public money under a single overarch, which will provide for accountability, equity, confidence of the citizens, and development of the country, enabling for foresight and control of the procurement and disposal of properties. And this is how we will decrease the possibilities of corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. So our call is to repeal the Procurement and Public Property Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ramona, for that perspective from the local government point of view. And of course, you know, as mentioned, wherever there's corruption and lack of transparency in public funds, it means that there is less public funds to be allocated. And of course, local government will suffer. And as we know, local government is very, very important And Ramona, you mentioned the issue of Petrotrin and the closing down of Petrotrin. And that raises a very important point, especially for the constituents of Fyzabad, because there are many assets of Petrotrin in Fyzabad and surrounding areas that the government might be thinking of disposing of. And the question on many of the minds of the constituents and indeed of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago is what process is going to be used to dispose of those very valuable assets, and whether there's going to be transparency in the disposal of those assets. So that's a very, very important aspect of this whole issue of removing the camera, Gus, over these transactions. As I invite the next speaker to contribute, I just want to bring our attention back again to Clause 5, Section 7, which was amended to exclude financial services and accounting and auditing services. Our next guest is financial advisor, a tremendous experience in banking, both the local and international level. And Ved, I would be very interested to hear your perspective on how this is going to affect especially those services and other points that you may want to make. Mr. Ved Siriram.
Thank you, Dr. Bodo, for inviting me to speak on a very relevant topic at this point in our juncture, historic in our history. For the simple reason, Trinidad, as you know, some of their economists are saying we are bankrupt or near bankrupt. And what government is now doing is spending borrowed money. When you are spending your own money and based on perhaps some savings, there could still be a tolerance for inaccuracies or mistakes. When you are spending borrowed money, there's no room for mistakes. And we have found ourselves in this position. We can debate why we have reached and so on. That's a subject of another time. But by and large, the government is actually borrowing money, and banks who are reckless are still lending the government money instead of telling the government, look, we no longer can lend you, you have reached the limit, or we can only lend you X amount more. Government has found itself in a precarious position where they cannot meet their recurrent expenditure. And that's one of the reasons why the corporations are not getting their dues. Whilst in a budget you can say, look, I effectively promised to allocate X amount to Superior Regional Corporation, Y amount to Tobago. Those are just promises. It does not mean to say that the money government has allocated, that they have it in hand to actually give it during the year. So we are going to find more and more the actual payments to the regional corporations, other state enterprises are going to get less and less. And we are seeing the government's position. They have already stated that whilst we can lock down the country, we do not have money to give anyone. Whilst we have given over $20 billion in subsidies, we no longer have money to do that. And that is going to reverberate in significant financial pain to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. But regards to the specific omission of finance with regards to the procurement, it's a very curious omission, and I'll tell you why. Government, I've investigated many of these transactions over the years for state enterprises and for central government, and quite frankly, at the Ministry of Finance nor at all the state enterprises, they do not have the technical competence to evaluate some very sophisticated financial proposals that are made to them. And Trinidad, over the last 20 to 30 years, have been littered with these transactions. And if now we omit that from, let's say, an independent regulator who hopefully would have had the expertise to deal with these transactions, if you leave it in the hands of central government who do not have the expertise, please, we can expect significant losses to go forward with regards to any of these financial transactions. If I may name a few, and I'm not too sure under which regime it was done, but we entered into a yen swap where at 1 year, on 1 year in the budget, they put aside over 900 million for a margin call. Another transaction that I had personally, along with a colleague, investigated was that on a 10-minute call, they lost over $75 million. That was brought to the attention on the Panelist time, and we were given the contract to review it. But the fact remains is that you cannot just leave this in the hands of the Ministry of Finance. And how we are structured today is that we are actually, with these amendments, we are effectively creating a monarchy. Because as we know, in cabinet, if we have a very powerful prime minister, he can swing decisions one way or the next. So therefore, we are having a monarchy, and this legislation with the amendment effectively supports that point of view. And we have to be very mindful going forward that these amendments that the government has suggested should not be excluded from the procurement regulation. But I want to bring to the attention of the audience and the panel is that the President has a very important role to play. And I'm wondering, how could such a bad piece of legislation reach so far? In this day and age, we have taken a retrograde step that has taken us back over 50 years. So we have not learned from the rest of the world. We have not learned from our own experiences to say, let us tighten these regulations and let us tighten it in such a manner that it gives confidence to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago that their monies are being well managed and well spent. And the President, on her own accord, should recognize it and refuse to sign or refuse to proclaim this legislation. There should be no need for us to petition the President to do so. She should do it on her own accord. Her Excellency is a senior lawyer, a senior attorney, and she can easily see the flaws. She has research officers at her disposal. All she has to do is ask them to pull out the best practices in the world today and see where we rank in the event that we accept the amendments. Well, thank you for now, Dr. Bodo.
Thank you very much, Vaden. I'm sure we can come back to you for some further points. So we spoke about the exclusion of legal services, the financial services, and very curiously as well now the exclusion of the medical services. And of course there are many situations where emergency repairs have to be done. I guess as you mentioned, the procurement of parts and so on. There's also the procurement of services. There are many services that are outsourced by the Ministry of Health. For example, in the areas of kidney, renal dialysis and cardiac services and so on. And of course, the question now is whether these services are going to be excluded in terms of the contracts that will be awarded. And at the end of the day, whether the population will be getting value for money. And it is worrisome because just last week in the newspapers it was reported that there was a shortage of drugs and supplies, which would have caused a curtailment of surgery at the San Fernando General Hospital. And of course, again, it comes back to the point that if there is not transparency in procurement, and if the camera is removed, Gus, it means that the money that could have been spent to supply these drugs and the other supplies has gone into someone's pocket. And this is really what we are talking about when we remove the transparency. And of course, there's also the issue of the public investment and so on, the mega projects, building and refurbishments of infrastructure and the awarding of those contracts. And of course, we do have the issue of the procurement of vaccines that is on the horizon, and the transparency that hopefully will be involved. But again, we are not certain whether these will be excluded under this act. Sean, I just wanted to come back to you for a minute, because you spoke broadly in terms of the amendments, but I don't know if I can ask you to focus maybe a little bit on how the exclusion of legal services in particular is a worrisome development in this act. So, Sean, if I can ask you to come back in.
Well, Doc, just as Mr. Youssef would have spoken about the fact that we need to be able to account for what monies are being spent on, because at the end of the day, these are tax-paying dollars. What we have seen in the past is that there have been a selection of a specific battery of attorneys who are always on the call for this particular administration. The unfortunate thing is that if such services aren't properly procured, as we're dealing with right now, you would have those same attorneys now finding themselves in positions where they are collecting briefs and charging all sorts of monies, and we aren't entirely certain if the public is going to be getting value for money, which I think is the biggest issue with having legal services being excluded from the Office of the Procurement Regulator. We are guided under the Legal Profession Act with respect to how fees are supposed to be charged. That is also buttressed by a practice direction that would have been issued by the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court with respect to how fees are to be charged based upon our year of call, the capacity within which we are acting, or either instructing or advocate, and also and that informs then our hourly rate. What you would not want happening is, because there's improper procurement or no procurement at all, because the oversight, as it were, was removed from the Office of the Procurement Regulator, you may have persons sometimes, I'm saying it could be possible, sending in fees that fall outside of what is supposed to be charged. There is also a question as to whether or not the attorney may be competent within that particular field that he is being called upon to either give advice or act for the state on. And these are questions that would come about if there is an office, procurement office regulator then, who can distill those issues properly, make the best choice with respect to selecting the attorney or attorneys based upon the fees that are going to be charged. And so the country or the state entity, but ultimately the country and its citizens, gets value for money from the work being done by that lawyer or the selection of lawyers.
Thanks. Thank you, Sean. Before we move on, I just wanted to address a question which has come up on the Facebook from Mr. Hari Maharaj, and to thank him for his question. Can you tell me what action has been taken? And in fact, this meeting is one of a series of meetings that have been taking place throughout all 19 of the UNC constituencies. And of course, there is a petition that is being circulated, and we are asking citizens to sign. We've had several thousand signatures already procured on this petition, and we continue and we urge citizens to have a look at the petition. Ultimately, it is the intention of the leader of the opposition, and I want to commend the leader of the opposition for taking such a strong stand on this matter. And ultimately, it is the intention of the leader of the opposition to bring to the Parliament, by way of a private motion in the Parliament, to seek to review. So that is the ultimate action. But we just want to make sure that we are fully prepared and that the population understands when the time comes and will give, what is the support that is required. One of the issues that we mentioned as well is the exclusion of government-to-government contracts. Ved, I don't know if you want to make a comment on this particular exclusion and how that can affect, transparency, good governance, in a country.
There are many commercial transactions now being done through government-to-government contact. I want to differentiate between government-to-government contact and government-to-government contracts. And if we use the example with, let's say, a Chinese firm that is owned by the government of China, that's the major shareholder, the government of China, does that constitute a government-to-government contract? Now, the Act and the bill as presented did not define what government-to-government was. So I think that has to be very, very clear. Not because you call up government in Australia and say, look, we are looking to procure some boats, can you assist us? Does that constitute a contract? But regardless of the contact we have, how do we know, because we did not contact any other government, how do we know we are getting the best deal? So all of that must fall under the purview of a third party, an independent party, and there are procedures with regards to the procurement even if you go through a government. And those procedures ought to be documented by the regulator and within government itself. What is your procurement policy, regardless of whether we establish a regulator or not? Good governance require the government as a board of directors to establish what are the procedures for your procurement of boats. And Parliament should be, that document, the policy with regards to procurement must be subject to parliamentary debate, so that is where the policies with regards to governance is actually reviewed and agreed to, so that everyone knows. So the Prime Minister and his other ministers, they know they cannot just go to another country and cut a deal for the procurement of something. That is outrageous in my view. No good corporate governance will allow such practice. So regardless of whether we have the procurement regulator or not, we the citizens, the opposition and all parliamentarians are entitled to ask the question, what are your procurement policies, whether it's through a private company or whether it's through government? Because at the end of the day, they must demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that they have reviewed all possible suppliers to provide specific boats according to some specification. And we also have to have a procedure in place to ensure that we are getting value for money, and the cost of those vessels could be defended.
Doc?
Yeah, thank you, Ved. Sean?
If I may, a perfect example of why the Office of the Procurement Regulator is necessary when it comes to government-to-government arrangements, or even government-to-financial institution arrangements, apart from the hostile vessels, would have been this China Gazubo situation. Now, the most peculiar thing about that entire arrangement was that you had this company, China Gazubo, which I also believe, if I'm not mistaken, is part owned by the government of China. I could be wrong. But they would have tendered, allegedly, to the HDC. The HDC would have had their own battery of attorneys, in-house attorneys, who would have vetted the arrangement, vetted the contract, agreed to the terms and conditions of the contract, forwarded that particular contract now to the Office of the Attorney General, who allegedly also vetted the arrangement, vetted the contract, and said, listen, no problem, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is comfortable with this thing, and we're going to enter into this arrangement. This would have come to the cabinet. All the members of cabinet, the Prime Minister, would have had oversight of this thing, and they were comfortable with it. Had it not been for the vigilance of the United National Congress, the vigilance of Mrs. Prasad Bissessar, for us to procure this contract and to see it for what it was, and illuminate it and educate the public about it, we would have signed to such an arrangement which would have been catastrophic for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And all of this would have happened over all of these people having oversight of this document, and they were still properly prepared to enter into this arrangement. You would have had an arrangement where these contractors would have had to be paid in US dollars. We know what the situation is with Forex in this country, and they were prepared to pay these people in US dollars. We know the crime situation is in this country with respect to resources for the TTPS. begging for resources every Monday morning and not getting it. And these people, this contract called for the government of Trinidad and Tobago to provide security, not a security service, but the TTPS to watchman these people on the work site, wherever they live in. They were to provide housing for these persons as well too, with this TTPS security, 24/7. This is the type of arrangement that the PNM is now asking, or at least not asking, directing and telling you, the public of Trinidad and Tobago, no office of procurement regulator should watch over this thing. Leave it to us. We will take care of you. And that is taking care of you PNM style. And that is why it is important for us to voice our concerns, because contracts like that should never see the light of day in Trinidad and Tobago. We are not a third world nation where people from wherever they come from could dictate to us how we're supposed to operate and treat our citizens as second class in nature. This is important for us to voice these concerns so that contracts like that could not occur in this country.
Thank you, Sean. You know, in the medical profession, we call that a near miss. And of course, Trinidad and Tobago, you know, would have been very fortunate that we as an opposition and the leader of the opposition would have recognized and bring to attention that issue. So we as an opposition are very concerned, but our concerns over this procurement amendment has been echoed by others as well. I think it's important to understand that there are other sectors of society that have viewed this legislation with a great degree of concern. We saw in the Trinidad Express, December 6, 2020, the Joint Chambers, the Joint Consultative Council, the JCC, and Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute, the TTTI, would have called on the government to withdraw the amendments to Section 7.2 of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Bill 2020. And you will recall that that is a section that speaks to the exclusion of several important services. On Monday, 4th January 2021, the Deputy Chairman of the Procurement Board resigns. James Shankett has tendered his resignation as Deputy Chairman of the Procurement Regulation Board, following what he claims was the final emasculation of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015 by the government. This is a very powerful statement by no less than the Deputy Chairman of the Procurement Regulation Board. So quite a statement here, indeed, in terms of someone who is not prepared to compromise his values, and of course a true patriot of this country. And this December 3rd, 2020, Wired868.com, dangerous to the extreme. And here the MSG as well gets involved and points to disturbing amendments proposed for Public Procurement Act. So in addition to the loyal opposition of Trinidad and Tobago, we also have others who are very concerned in our society. I just want to open it up back again. Gus, I don't know if you may want to make any additional points.
Yes. I want to pick up on what my fellow panelist Sean said. Concerning this yes, the briefs, the lawyers' fees and so on. You know, we have been changing governments very often since 1986. And this has been an issue ever since, where when the government cut in, they have their own set of lawyers and the opposition complain. Similarly with the presiding officers. Ever since, the opposition, whoever they are, always complaining about the biasness of the presiding officers. Yet we don't do anything about it. We don't do anything about the presiding officers and their biasness, because they come in from the bosom of the party that in power. And we do have a problem with this kind of thing, yet we don't address it. It's time we address these things. And I want to say something about the perception of corruption, which to me is just as important as corruption. When you leave all these things that you exclude from the watchman, from the regulator, you leave people to think and speculate and say that, you know, they are Stephen. And corruption has a ripple effect. You know, you haven't heard what he's saying, if the priest could play, who's me? So if they can do it at the top, who is me? So the small man and everybody start doing things outside of the law. And because the ones on top are not adhering to accountability. So I, as a small man, why should I account? Why should I live by the book if the big man is not? And the last point I want to pick up on Sister Ramona Victor with the local government thing. I think she is making a strong case for giving in some kind of independence to the local government, that they can generate their own funds. And then you have the regulator to oversee them, not the minister. You know, I used to be in local government, so I know a thing or two about local government. Yes, not the minister. The same regulator could oversee this transaction of auctioning these vehicles or whatever. They can generate funds, and they can so oversee that they can generate their own funds, give them some kind of independence, not dependent. But in this country, the last thing I will close it, the more years of independence is the more dependent we as a people becoming. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And of course, we've heard so much talk about local government reform, and it is yet to come. And it would appear that the only time that we hear about local government reform and the PNM gets serious is on the eve of any election. So that remains to be seen. Ramona, I don't know if you wanted to come back in. You okay? Yeah. So, you know, so ladies and gentlemen, really and truly, you know, every citizen really should be concerned, you know, with this legislation, as it is our state resources that is at risk. You know, never before have we seen such secrecy, lack of accountability, and the total erosion of transparency as it relates to the manner in which this government has handled the resources which belongs to the people of this nation. This forum and the others that have preceded it, you know, show the need to repeal this present procurement amendment as being very important to every single citizen of our nation, because it deals with the manner in which the state resources, which affects all of our lives, will be managed. You know, tonight we have to ask the population, millions of your taxpayer dollars have been spent by this government. You know, has it benefited you? Has it been used to the benefit of the country? Has the country received value for money? And I think that question is a very interesting, very important question, because in these times when the finance minister and the prime minister is claiming that, you know, there's not going to be enough resources if there's another lockdown, and threatening the population, you know. And of course, we have to all, you know, adhere to the public health regulations and so on. But the management of the fallout of the economy from the COVID-19 remains, that's another discussion. But the point about it is that if funds are managed properly and there's less corruption in public procurement, then there are funds going to be available, you know, to support citizens who will need it going forward. So, you know, we have to ask the population, millions of dollars of your assets are being at risk. We've spoken about the refinery, the port, and the gas stations being, you know, put up for sale and so on. You know, and you have to ask yourself, do you know who will buy these? Will our country and citizens receive proper value for money? So essentially, you know, we have to come to the conclusion that the government has robbed the citizens of the ability to see how our assets, how their assets and the money is being used. The camera has been removed, Gus said. A very, very important camera, especially over the transactions. And sadly, thanks to the actions of this government, all of these issues will be swept under the carpet as their new procurement legislation has defeated the ability of our citizens to truly be able to see how our assets are managed and taxpayers' dollars are spent. So, as I conclude, I want to say a very special thanks to each member of the panel. I think we've had a very fruitful discussion here tonight. Varying perspective. Sean, I want to say a very special thank you. I know you're very knowledgeable in this area and very passionate about this. You feel very strongly, and I'm sure as an attorney, you know, it hurts you to see this poor legislation coming through the parliament. And this is another thing that's been happening under this government. You know, the fact that they've been able to remove the need for special majority and to get legislation passed. And that's a very frightening development, you know, for governance in Trinidad and Tobago. Gus, thank you very much. I know you took the time and the effort to come all the way from Port of Spain to join us. And I thank you for your perspective. I think the analogy with the camera and removing the camera is very important and will make, you know, the ordinary citizen understand. Ramona, thank you very much. Very hard-working councillor in the SIPA Regional Corporation. Very, very passionate about her Burgesses and trying to do the best with the limited resources that is available to her as a UNC councillor under PNM government. But that's another story in terms of UNC corporations, whether they receive adequate resources. And Ved, as usual, thank you very much, you know, for your wide experience, your expertise, and bringing, you know, tremendous different perspective to this discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you that the petition is still available for sign-in. I want to reiterate and thank the leader of the opposition for taking up this cause and championing this cause, a very important cause. And as mentioned, the idea is to bring as a private motion to the Parliament to attempt to, in our attempt to get the government to repeal this Public Procurement Act 2020. And we call upon all right-thinking citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to look very carefully at what this PNM government has imposed upon the country and upon citizens and upon our resources by passing this legislation, and to examine for yourself what the problems are going to be, and to, you know, to come out and speak, you know, and to speak up so we can have this bit of bad law but so much implications repealed. So again, as I close, I want to encourage everyone to try and remain safe. We do have what appears to be a spike in the COVID-19 cases. It's a very frightening development that we've noted. The variant of concern, the Brazil variant, that's P1 variant, and I urge my fellow citizens to to follow the public health regulations and do what you have to do to keep yourself safe. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and have a safe night. Thank you.
Politics, slight change. Tuesday night, 7:30 change to Wednesday night, 7:30. We're changing Douglas politics for this week only. Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m. Douglas politics. Minister of National Security, the Kobo Sweatman, the Pomsite Rasta, the what? Mr. Minister of Stopgap, give him Kobo Sweat in public utilities, move him here, move him there, up, down, junior, parliament there, up, down, junior, politics, slide. Tuesday night, 7:30 change to Wednesday night, 7:30. We're changing Douglas politics for this week only. Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m. Douglas politics. Minister of National Security, the Kobo Sweatman, the Pomsite Rasta, the what? Mr. Minister of Stopgap, give him Kobo Sweat in public utilities, move him here, move him there, up, down, junior, parliamentary secretary, 35 years, an incompetent nowherean, and small pin. First you're gone, and you lost Asha, you're gone Goodwood Park, and now you lost your portfolio. You lost that big portfolio, Minister of National Security, demoted. Small pin, you're getting smaller. The PNM is crumbling. Get rid of the PNM. Dogra politics, 7:30 p.m. Wednesday night. 7:30 p.m. Wednesday night. Sharp.
Hey my friends, you are invited to join us on radio and TV Jagati as UNC's Shogunas West presents Why Repeal the Procurement Amendment Act 2020. Joining us on panel will be your MP for Shogunas West, Mr. Dinesh Rambali, Mr. Gary Abood, Corporate Secretary of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, Dr. David Lee, Member of Parliament for Pointe-a-Pierre, and Ms. Karen Nunes Teixeira, Senior Attorney at Law and former Government Minister. On Wednesday, 21st April 2021 from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. on radio and TV Jagati, also live streaming on the UNC's Facebook page. The Facebook page for your Member of Parliament for Shogunas West, Mr. Dinesh Rambali, and of course the Facebook page for radio and TV Jagati and the Tego TV app.